Hi everyone, my name is Daryl from New Zealand Migration. Today I'll be interviewing Sunika, herself a recent migrant to New Zealand and interestingly also a clinical psychologist. Now, moving to a new country can be one of the 5 most stressful things you can do in your life. It's up there with divorce and losing a loved one. So, hi Sunika.
Hey.
So Sunika, moving to a new country is very stressful. Could you talk about the process that you experienced?
Yeah, I will, but I think before speaking about my own process, I think it would be quite helpful to look actually at the phases that one goes through in immigrating to a new context and a new country. And from a psychological perspective, we know this by looking at the experiences of other immigrants. And there are a few distinct phases. The first of these actually occurs pre-immigration, when you start anticipating the move, preparing for the move, getting your documents together, finding reasons why you're moving. For instance, we have the push reasons, trauma. In my country of origin, that is one of the push factors quite often. Crime, not having opportunities for the kids, for instance. And you have the pull factors in New Zealand, for instance, that would be the beautiful environment, the safety, the friendliness of the people. And of course, because it is an English country. In this preparatory phase, you actually go through a lot of stress, preparing everything, getting your family to understand the reasons for moving, and dealing with loss. You might actually have experiences of idealizing the new country that you're moving to and devaluing the country that you come from. Then the immigration happens. You get onto the plane and you step off on the other side. You met at customs. This is a new experience. You have beautiful people smiling at you, and this is a very different experience. You go directly into the honeymoon phase. You're loving it. It's a beautiful country. Look at it outside. It's clean, etc., etc. Almost as if you denying a realistic appraisal of what is actually happening within that context, and denying the incredible pressure that you've been under for quite some time in preparing for this move. And the honeymoon phase lasts for a couple of months. And then all ups must have downs. You go into crisis. Crisis phase can happen anywhere from 6 months after up to 3 years after moving to a new country, where you start questioning the reasons, your motivations around how come have you moved. You experience acute sense of loss about identity, who you are, and then eventually that levels out to adaptation, and you're trying to make sense of who you are in this context and the new country that you've chosen. So these are the phases that one goes through.
Although I'm a born and bred New Zealander, I can actually appreciate what you're talking about, because I have lived abroad for about 18 years of my life, and I came back only 3 months ago. I was living in Asia, which is obviously quite different to Africa. I experienced the challenge of not even being able to say hello or thank you in another language, and the transitions. I actually started off actually disliking where I went, and I went through some might say a Buddhist type experience where I had to come to a point where I ended up leaving the country on a high note and liking and loving the people once I came to understand them. Which does lead me on to the next question, and the question is, how much would you say attitude plays a part in success?
I think attitude is pivotal. If we go back to the crisis phase that I have described, during that time you have to question yourself. You don't get the normal recognition that you're used to. The feedback from, oh, I'm doing this, I have a house, I own this, I have certain financial security. If not, I can ring mum up and she can support me. so you feel quite lost in that. You don't have, like you said, your language, and many times, yes, New Zealand, for instance, is dominated by English, but there's a bit of a different interactional style. The social cues are different, the behavior is different, even though it's the same language. Your attitude needs to adjust to that. So if we look at attitude, we certainly should consider the ways that people actually adjust. You said initially you hated it. That is that feeling of separateness. I feel marginalized, and then an active move towards not really assimilating, but integrating some aspects of the new culture and holding on to some aspects of your old culture, and finding a new sense of self within that. Knowing that, yes, I might not be the same as before, I might not do the same things as before, I might not be able to speak the same type of language, but I am still meaningful as a person. And in order for that to happen, you need to have an attitude of openness. Be flexible in your approach. Be inquisitive. Find things out, look around, almost be a tourist in this new place and absorb and soak up the changes in yourself and the new things in different cultures. In addition to that, I think a very realistic approach is necessary to see things for what they are. So again, moving from that honeymoon phase to seeing things that are maybe not that great in this new culture, but weighing them up, having that balanced approach. And then I think what for me is incredibly important is self-compassion. To know that I can actually be sad for myself, that I'm allowed to have that. So those are the qualities, the attitudes, I think, that are pivotal in adjusting to a new culture.
For me, I think it was summing that up for me, and one phrase was, I thought, well, it is what it is. And the day I accepted that was the day my attitude changed. I couldn't change the place. I had to change. And
I think if I can come in there, I think that is incredibly important. That is that acceptance aspect. A lot of times when we marginalize ourselves or separate ourselves, that is quite a protective mechanism, because we don't want to accept that change. In the New Zealand context, I think for a lot of South Africans, depending on where they are in their own process and their own uniqueness, they need that support of being separate from the dominant culture here in New Zealand. Then I'm very understanding of that, but it is also holding you back. And the moment, like you said, you accepted the change and how difficult it actually was, then you can start moving and you can integrate, which is the balanced approach where we actually want to aim for to get mental health going and just to adjust in the end of the day.
Moving to a new country is very stressful on relationships and on children. I guess children, in my experience, do adapt pretty well, and I know that sometimes at an interview you have to have both the husband and wife on board if that's the relationship. Often I've seen the wife say nothing, and I need to make sure they're both on board about moving. And so could you comment a little bit about the impact that moving has on marriages, children, maybe what they should think about to make it successful?
Yeah, so I touched upon how important it is to actually speak to others and to get that support, and also how difficult it could be for a partner to be that support for you and also for the kids. I think what is incredibly important to remember in that is that children look to their parents to be stable, to be okay enough, good enough, for them to adapt easier. I won't want to say easily, because I don't think we should think that it is that easy for children. it's a bit of a myth. We might not be able to understand their behavior as we would our own and adult behavior, but they also struggle depending on their age and their stage in life. Adolescents tend to struggle more. And they would, for instance, have more acting out behavior, they would get more angry, but it's for mum and dad to actually ensure that they're okay as much as they can be okay, and that they communicating. We know that kids' mental health is dependent on parents' mental health. To look at that. But kids and parents it can be difficult. It can be quite stressful and a lot of strain in that relationship. And moving then to husband and wives, partners, very strainful and stressful. Communication can be strained. The husband, and quite often it's the husband that finds the job first, not in all cases. But the person that has the position might not have the same need of reaching out, not the same need of support. They get home, they're so exhausted, and then they still have to carry another person's difficulties. And there can be a lot of resentment that builds up. So just to be very much aware of that, and you actually need your partner in this stage. There's a lot of divorce that happens, a lot of extramarital affairs that happen during times of migration. If you consider especially the crisis phase where you're just not coping, that can really have quite a detrimental impact on relationships. Also the relationships at home. People might be quite negative about the move. You might not be able to reach out to your parents, might not be able to reach out to your friends. You might feel forgotten, and that might leave you with a sense of sadness. I think we need to know that it is quite stressful, but it's also worth it. Relationships can actually start building around a new sense of identity and become quite strong and resilient within this migration process.
The next thing I want to ask you is, how important is it to have a network in the new country, in New Zealand?
I think it is vital to have social resources. In my profession, it was not very important to have a network of colleagues and professionals to assist me to get a position. But I do know for other people that is actually quite important. But I think I would like to just think a little bit about how important social input is for mental health. So in that respect, a network of others, people that can support you through difficult times, people that can speak your language of suffering, if you want to call it that, of mourning, of loss and grieving, that's incredibly important. We talked about the crisis phase, and we talked about the honeymoon phase, and these two phases, they will occur for every immigrant. And it's incredibly important, if you're in that honeymoon, that beautiful phase, that blissful, euphoric phase, to already set up that network so that you can preempt the difficulties that will happen in the crisis phase. Because, and we must probably speak about that, mental health issues are so common in that crisis period. And then you have resources. So in that respect, a network would be incredibly important to just maintain your process and look after yourself in that way.
On a practical level, would you know where someone could, or how they could develop a network?
That's a difficult one. I think it's something that most immigrants struggle with. Yet again, I think we need to consider integration as the aim. So to separate yourself from the culture that you are moving into, that would in the long run not be ultimately what you would want. So possibly to have a bit of a balance between having people from your own culture, having people from home, but also trying actively to engage with people here. New Zealanders, other immigrants, to have an experience of that. Then also knowing, and that's difficult to say, and I think it's unique to every person. Every person has a certain personality and a certain way of engaging with others. You could have colleagues at work that would be able to support you. You could actually reach out to a lot of support groups. I know, for instance, of a colleague of mine that runs a beautiful art therapy group in Browns Bay, for instance. That is something that one can explore. I think this is where, for instance, the immigration service that you use, and I know you guys do that, you give that added value of having these social connection events where people can actually start talking about their experience. There's normalization in that. But then also to make sure that you reach out to other experiences. Joining colleges, for instance, after hours, educational events, going to galleries, whatever you like, just trying to manage your own discomfort and reaching out, that would be very important.
In this day and age, we use a lot of technology to network, and as someone who monitors our Facebook page for the company I work for, there's a lot of half or misinformation out there. I'm always getting emails from people coming here, I read this, I read that, and it's freaking me out. Could you comment on the influence of blogs and international forums dealing with some of the less than positive information or misinformation that can be out there?
So I think it is incredibly important to actually delve into these online fora, the blogs and the research, and triangulate, look at the different sources and make up your own mind. In doing so, you are preparing yourself for what you're going to see. But it's like maps and territories. We purchase a map and we assume that is how it's going to look like, but when we get there, it's very different. So to have these first-hand experiences and people going through their own difficulties and putting that on the online posts, even if it's misinformation, you can actually understand where they come from. So it does create a certain therapeutic space for you to adjust to what you possibly can expect. I think of it as, for instance, a photograph. If you have lost a loved one, you keep the photograph, or lost in a relationship, you keep the photo of your boyfriend, girlfriend for quite some time. You look at it quite regularly. You feel quite a lot of sadness, but after a while it subsides and you don't need to attach to that photograph anymore. And it's the same thing with the online forum. After a while, you might not need, depending on your unique makeup, you might not need to go there that often. Because yes, you're right, there's a lot of misinformation. And it could actually contribute in certain instances to being stuck and never moving to its integration and being separate.
Talking about what you're just saying, who would you talk to, and maybe professionally or personally?
I think it's very important to talk and to verbalize externally, to reflect constantly in your head, which is also valuable, could be quite harmful at a certain stage. So you have to stop and start talking to others. In this regard, for me personally, it was my partner. Also professionally, I have a supervisor, but also a therapist. So for me, that was very important. And I think people can actually reach out to such resources. What is important to remember is that your kids, your partner, they go through their own processes, and you need to be very aware of what you for instance, discuss with your children. Try and rather model problem solving, the openness to experience, the flexibility that I spoke about, than handing them the responsibility for your emotions when you talk. For you to have a compassionate ear, an empathic ear, not just bringing in your own experience in a conversation, but listening to your partner in that respect as well. I think for women, for instance, it is, especially immigrant women, it's quite difficult because they're leaving a lot of their family members behind, the people that they could externally process with, and they come in here and they don't have that resource. I also think that we have Skype. It's a wonderful thing, and New Zealand has fantastic broadband, so we can actually really Skype with our family members. If you can't, then reach out to professional resources, like I've mentioned, the art therapy group on Browns Bay. And there are many online support forums as well. That's maybe not specific for your culture, but these are people in similar situations. And you know what? Maybe just have a talk to someone in the coffee shop. Mm-hmm. That's also important, because we are actually all human and we share a lot of experiences. And if we can recognize that in others, they might recognize that in ourselves.
So as a psychologist, what coping strategies would you give to someone also very close to home as a migrant yourself?
Let's think about that. I think first and foremost to preempt that it's not going to be easy. To know that there are certain phases that you're going to move through. And when you're there, to just think back maybe on this conversation and the conversations with other people, and knowing I'm here now, you know, and then to be compassionate to yourself and say, this is tough, and I'm allowed to really be sad, to mourn the loss of what I knew and was familiar with at home, and my whole identity questions and experience. Thereafter, on a very practical level, to limit your stressors at home. If you can only make peanut butter and jam sandwiches for 2 months, and that's all that you can do, that's what you do. If you can cope with that, that's it. What else can you do? So it's the self-compassion, the preempting, validation. I think what is important is also then to reach out, to know when you're in crisis. It's about crisis management of your own migration process.
You talked a little bit before about the things you miss from home, your family, obviously, that support network. What else is a person really going to miss? What are they going to miss from their home country?
And I think this is a good time to go back to the very first question that you asked. You asked me about my own process during this immigration, just to go back there as well. I think you sit with sadness and loss on a personal level. I think I miss nature. I miss, although there's beautiful trees and it's beautiful, but I miss the sounds. I miss the jackals at 2 a.m. in the morning, you know, I woke up for it. I miss the haridas flying over the roof, being able to drive past giraffe because I lived next to the nature reserve. So these things I miss. I love the chaos and the creative problem solving from where I come from. I miss that, and of course I miss family and friends. But I'm aware of missing that, and I allow myself to miss that, and to at times mourn that, and to have little transitional objects. You know, I have my little beaded figurines and my little Bamaleki chairs and my Ethiopian crosses. You know, to have a sense of place in objects as well. I think what people miss here would be the cultural objects. They might miss the food, they might miss hearing the language, the literature. But to know it's all accessible. Our world is so much smaller. And in a way, I'm reminded of the movie The Piano. You know, the pivotal scene of the piano being washed on shore was shot close to where I now stay. And I think in a way we don't have to have that sense of loss anymore because we are far more global. But to still have that sadness of I can't just go there, and that's okay.
Well, kia ora and thank you, Sanika. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.